I was the most foolish girl, chasing after Peter for 8 years, but he never even felt a ripple in his heart for me. It wasn't until he carelessly threw away the bracelet my grandmother had painstakingly made for him into the trash. At that moment, my heart turned cold, and I walked away without looking back. Later, Peter stood at my door with red eyes, questioning me. "Is your love so worthless?" I smiled, holding his best friend in my arms. "Well, I'm just a big fool, so naturally, my love is worthless too." Chapter 1. I stood outside the private room holding a cake, hearing the chaotic and noisy sounds inside. Among them, a particularly shrill female voice stood out. "Peter, do you think that fool will come to celebrate your birthday today?" I heard Peter respond indifferently. "You said it yourself, she's a fool." I pushed open the door and entered the room. The atmosphere instantly became tense, and everyone stared at me as if waiting for a show. The man sitting in the center, holding a woman in his arms, was Peter, a notorious playboy. He was also the one I had been hopelessly in love with for years. The room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. The woman beside Peter suddenly stood up and walked straight towards me. She poked at my cake with her pale fingers. "Did you make this yourself?" I nodded lightly, and then watched as she slapped the cake to the ground, ruining the expensive carpet. Her coquettish voice rang in my ears. "Oh dear, I didn't mean to. Don't be mad, okay?" I turned to look at Peter, who smirked, stood up, and pulled the woman back into his arms, speaking lazily. "Why are you looking at me? If it's dirty, just lick it clean." I stood there quietly, my voice barely audible. "Peter, will you regret this?" The question seemed out of place. Peter walked towards me, stepping on the cake carelessly, and glanced at me nonchalantly. That's my answer. Chapter 2. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision. Maybe I should have thrown the cake in his face and told him I didn't care. But I couldn't. My lips trembled slightly, and I finally managed to say one thing. "I'll wait for you at home." Laughter erupted around me. I wiped my tears as I walked out of the room. "Miss Smith, what are you doing here?" Suddenly, a white handkerchief appeared in front of me. I looked up and saw a handsome man offering it to me gently. It was John. He also came to Peter's birthday party. I had met John a few times. He was Peter's rival, so Peter never got along with him. So even his rival was invited. And I came alone to celebrate. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt, and I lowered my head. "I have something to do, I need to go." John softly said oh and then walked with me. "It's not safe for a girl to be alone here." He smiled. "Let me walk you to the door, okay?" I didn't want to get too involved with him, so I declined his offer. John didn't get angry, just smiled as he watched me leave. Back home, I made a pot of hangover soup and sat on the sofa, waiting for Peter to come back. Peter was always surrounded by various women. After his nights out, he often complained of headaches when he got home. Gradually, I got used to preparing hangover soup for him at home. Finally, the door opened, and I was about to get up, but stopped when I saw the woman beside him. Chapter 3. Peter was drunk, leaning on the woman's shoulder. The woman looked at me with a smug expression. "Sorry, Peter insisted I bring him home." After saying that, she seemed to remember something and laughed. "Oh, I forgot, Peter never gave you a proper title, so why am I explaining to you?" Her words stung, and I stood there, not knowing what to do. She settled Peter on the sofa and noticed the cold hangover soup I had left in the living room. She sneered, picked up the soup, and fed it to Peter spoon by spoon. "Peter was right, you really are a good little dog." As soon as she finished, Peter suddenly opened his eyes, his voice hoarse. "Luna." The woman responded excitedly, then glared at me. "Get lost if you know what's good for you." Peter called for Luna, that's my name. Their intimacy was unbearable to watch. I lowered my head, glanced at Peter, and walked upstairs. The bedroom was spacious. I lay on the bed, staring blankly. But I knew, he wasn't calling for Luna, but for the name he had kept in his heart for years, Lily. Lily was Peter's childhood sweetheart and fiancée, arranged by his family. People used to whisper that if I didn't look somewhat like Lily, Peter wouldn't have given me a second glance. I knew Peter was kind to me only because of my resemblance to Lily. But I was foolish, whoever was kind to me, I liked. Peter had been so good to me before, I couldn't live without him. Chapter 4. The next morning, the house was empty. I washed up and planned to go to work. At the office, I found out Peter wasn't there. I asked the secretary, who looked at me in surprise. "You don't know? Mr. Peter's fiancé returned from abroad, he's at the airport now." My mind went blank. No wonder he had been talking about Lily so much lately. I picked up my phone in a daze. The group chat was buzzing, everyone welcoming Lily back. There were also some mocking comments about me, saying the imposter was finally leaving. I scrolled through the messages and stopped at a photo. It was Peter and Lily hugging tightly at the airport. I stared at the photo, and my phone suddenly rang. It was Peter. Grasping at the last straw, a glimmer of hope ignited in me. Peter's lazy voice came through. "Anna, where are you?" "I'm at the office." I could faintly hear a sweet female voice, and Peter quickly covered the microphone, comforting her softly. Then he threw a sentence at me. "Go home and make some seafood porridge for Lily." "For whom?" He sounded impatient. "For Lily, she just got back and wants some homemade food. Make it and bring it to the office." Seafood porridge? I didn't understand what Peter was up to. I bit my lip. "Peter, you know I'm allergic to seafood." Before I could finish, Peter interrupted. "Just do it, don't make excuses." Then he added sarcastically. "You're a fool, what else can you do besides cook for me?" With that, he hung up. "You're a fool." I never thought I'd hear those words from Peter. My hands dropped weakly, my mind blank. The Peter before me seemed to be drifting further and further away from the Peter in my memories. Chapter 5. I was just a shadow of Lily. I told myself this, but the pain in my heart wouldn't go away. Peter almost always needed porridge, and I thought it was his preference. Now I realized it was actually Lily's favorite. Back home, my hands swelled like buns while peeling the seafood, and the porridge made my skin itch painfully. I endured the itch and brought the porridge to the office. Standing outside the CEO's office, I knocked on the door. It opened, and Peter glanced at me, taking the porridge. I hid my hands behind my back, but he didn't look at me again. Lily suddenly called out to me. "You're Anna, right?" She walked over with a smile, intimately holding Peter's arm as if she owned the place. "Peter said your porridge is delicious. Thank you for taking care of him all these years." My arms itched terribly, and I nodded dumbly, planning to leave quickly. Peter stopped me. "Where are you going? I haven't formally introduced you to." I started to feel breathless, shaking my head, trying to escape Peter's blockade. Lily's voice turned tearful. "Peter, does Anna not like me?" Peter frowned. "Anna, don't be ungrateful." Before he could finish, I blacked out and fell to the ground. The last thing I heard was Peter's anxious shout. "Anna?" Chapter 6. When I opened my eyes again, the smell of disinfectant filled my nose. "You're awake? I'm sorry, this is my fault." Peter's voice was hoarse, and he looked genuinely apologetic. My heart stirred, and I was about to comfort him when he continued. "Blame me, not Lily." I felt like I was choking, and I lowered my head in silence. "Peter, you remember I'm allergic to seafood, right?" "You should remember. A long time ago, after my first allergic reaction, you said you'd never let me touch seafood again." Peter paused, his eyes indifferent. "I told you, Lily wanted it. Isn't that enough?" He seemed to want to say more but was interrupted by a phone call. A girl's tearful voice came through. "Peter, I twisted my ankle, it hurts." Peter immediately became anxious. "Lily, stay there, I'll be right over." I stared at him, and before I knew it, I blurted out, "Peter, can you stay with me?" He stopped, looked at me impatiently, and then left. The door slammed shut with a loud bang. I sat quietly on the hospital bed for a long time before whispering, "Enough." I wasn't sure if I was saying it to Peter or to myself. My love seemed to be fading away bit by bit. Chapter 7. The villa was eerily quiet, so silent that I could hear my own breathing. Since returning from the hospital, Peter hadn't stepped foot in this house for several days. My phone screen suddenly lit up, showing a friend request from Lily. I hesitated for a moment but eventually pressed the accept button. Lily seemed to have anticipated my acceptance, as a message popped up immediately. It was a photo. The blanket had a yellow dotted pattern, and Peter was peacefully asleep, with faint red marks visible on his neck. Lily lay on his chest, a smug smile on her lips. A message accompanied the photo. "Anna, how about we meet up for a chat?" At the cafe. When I arrived, Lily was already there waiting. Seeing me, she gave me a once-over and then sneered. "I have to admit, as my substitute, you do bear some resemblance to me." I took a deep breath. "Lily, what do you want?" "Nothing much, really. Just seeing you cling to Peter all the time makes me uncomfortable." With that, Lily pulled out a medical report and slammed it in front of me. "Why should a fool like you stand by his side?" I remained calm. "That's something Peter should tell me himself." She seemed prepared for this and took out a voice recorder from her bag. "I wanted to spare you some dignity, but since you insist, I have no choice." Peter's voice played from the recorder. "Don't mention that fool. I only helped her out of pity back then, never thought she'd be so clingy. If I could do it over, I definitely wouldn't have saved her." His words were full of casual indifference. What I thought was a rescue turned out to be a mere joke for Peter. Lily stood up with a smile. "I hope you know your place, Anna." The coffee on the table had long gone cold. At that moment, I suddenly couldn't remember why I had fallen for Peter in the first place. Chapter 8. I realized from a young age that I wasn't very clever. Worse still, I only had a frail grandmother by my side. But I did have a pretty face, which brought me endless trouble from boys' advances and girls' harsh words. As for Peter, I shouldn't have crossed paths with someone like him in my lifetime. But fate had other plans when I turned 18. That night, I was walking home alone when a group of thugs gathered under the dim streetlights. They eyed me openly, whistling as they approached. "Hey, pretty girl, all alone?" I tried pleading, shouting for help, even resisting. But nothing worked. The sound of my clothes tearing filled my ears, and I closed my eyes in despair. Time seemed to freeze, and suddenly, everything went silent. I cautiously opened my eyes to see Peter standing in front of me, the glow of his cigarette illuminating the night. He exhaled a ring of smoke, a smile playing on his lips, and kicked the groaning thug on the ground. "Picking on a girl? Bad luck for you, running into me." Then he glanced at me, raised an eyebrow, and tossed me his jacket. "Don't walk alone at night anymore." It was the first time I felt warmth from someone else. The dim streetlight outlined his face, and at that moment, he seemed like a godsend to save me. So later, when he spoke harshly to me at home or let his friends bully and insult me, I couldn't help but think, why would the Peter who once saved me from danger now push me into another abyss of pain? Chapter 9. Walking down the street, I suddenly bumped into someone. This guy was ridiculously tall, and his collarbone hit my nose painfully. All the grievances from the past few days surged up, and tears streamed down my face. I couldn't hold it in and sat on the ground, crying my heart out. Damn Peter! And that Lily! Even a fool shouldn't be treated like this. The guy was clearly startled, fumbling to help me up. "Anna? Is that you?" That voice sounded so familiar. I looked up, and the tears flowed even harder. Why do I always run into John when I'm upset? In the park. I slumped on a bench, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Peter, that jerk, why does he call me a fool? He once said he'd be good to me, sob sob. Having a first love makes him so great. Let me tell you, my first love is 1,000 times better than his. I vented, and John nodded along, sharing my anger. Anna, you're such a good person. Peter must be blind to let you go. I don't like Lily either. Compared to you, she's nothing. I stopped and glanced at him, puzzled. Why was he more worked up than I was? Seeing I had stopped crying, John handed me a tissue. Feeling better? I nodded blankly. He smiled gently. You're beautiful and outstanding. No one has the right to undermine you. In this ordinary world, you just need to live for yourself. No one had ever said such words to me before. I looked at him and suddenly realized John and Peter would never be friends in this lifetime. Chapter 10. After saying goodbye to John, he gave me a light, almost ethereal hug. Looking forward to seeing you next time, when you'll find I've changed. Back at the villa, Peter was still not there. John was right, it was time for me to think about how to live my own life. After checking my bank account, I started packing up my bedroom. Passing by the study, something red in the trash can caught my eye. I walked closer and froze. It was the bracelet my grandmother had woven for Peter before she passed away. I couldn't believe Peter had the heart to throw it away. Though I had silently supported Peter for so many years, I felt he had liked me when we first met. He inexplicably transferred to my school. There were plenty of empty seats in the classroom, but Peter chose to sit next to me. His eyes were dark and bright, sparkling with light. What a coincidence, we meet again. From that moment, my world seemed to light up. Back then, Peter was truly wonderful. He would stand up for me when I was bullied, and he followed me to and from school, protecting me. He was my only friend. Blushing, I took him to meet my grandmother. She was my family, and Peter gradually became family too. In that shabby rental house, my grandmother lay on the bed, and Peter knelt beside her, listening intently to her ramblings. After he left, my grandmother told me Peter was a good boy and that I should cherish him. I promised her. But Grandma, it wasn't me who broke the promise. Before the college entrance exams, my grandmother's condition worsened rapidly. I spent all my savings, but it was futile. On her deathbed, she shakily handed 2 bracelets to Peter and me. I didn't know how she managed to weave them in her pain, but she said, "These are to protect you both. I hope Peter and you will always be safe." Peter's eyes reddened, and he promised to cherish the bracelets and me. Looking back now, Peter was indeed the best liar. Chapter 11. I stared at the bracelet in my hand, feeling nothing inside. Had I stopped loving Peter? No, I was still attached to the Peter in my memories. And in my memories, Peter always loved me. That was enough. Peter, no one can compare to the you in my memories. Realizing this, I laughed in relief. I could finally let you go and free myself. I packed my bags and returned to my own little place. It was a property I had bought earlier but never had the chance to live in. I sent my resignation letter to Peter's family and spent a few days at home, my phone buzzing incessantly. Anna, where are you? Come back and I'll let this slide. Not answering your phone? Eventually, Peter's messages grew more frantic. Fine, if you have the guts, never contact me again. Seeing these messages now only annoyed me. After blocking him, I finally felt at ease. The next day, I was surprised to find Peter lying at my doorstep, eyes closed. How did he find this place? Seeing me, Peter forced a smile. Still mad? Stop being stubborn and come home with me. I didn't understand what Peter was playing at. Shouldn't he feel relieved that I left? I took a deep breath and looked at him seriously. Peter, I don't like you anymore. Don't come looking for me again. The weight of my words made Peter try to laugh it off, but when he met my gaze, he panicked, searching my eyes for something. I knew I looked calm and indifferent now. Definitely not like someone who adored him. After a long pause, he pressed his lips together and muttered, "Suit yourself." His retreating figure, however, seemed more like a hasty escape. Chapter 12. I didn't expect to receive a message from Sean. Anne, are you free tonight? I booked a table at a restaurant, and it will go to waste if we don't go today. I'm not like Alex, who has a lot of friends. You're the only one I have. It would be impolite to refuse after he said that. I agreed readily. After thinking for a moment, I added, just call me Anne. At the upscale restaurant, when Sean saw me, his eyes lit up. Anne, it's wonderful that you could come. He stood up and pulled out a chair for me. I felt a bit flattered. No need to be so polite. I should thank you for what you said to me last time. Sean smiled gently and placed a cut piece of steak in front of me before speaking slowly. The key is that you were willing to think that way, Anne. His manners were elegant, and his words were just right. I couldn't help but sigh. Sean, you're such a good person. Compared to Alex, it was like night and day. For some reason, Sean's movements suddenly paused, and he looked at me with a hint of grievance. After dinner, Sean and I walked out of the private room and suddenly heard a familiar voice. Anne? I turned around and saw Alex holding hands with Linda, looking displeased. I felt annoyed too. Why did I have to run into him everywhere? When Alex saw who was beside me, his eyes darkened. Then, he grabbed my shoulder tightly. Alex's voice was filled with anger. You don't like me because of Sean? Do you like him? I gasped in pain, and Sean immediately pried Alex's hand away, his face cold. Alex, you're hurting Anne. This affectionate address clearly angered Alex. He pushed away Linda, who was trying to mediate, and stared at me intently. What do you like about him? Sean is an outsider in his own family. What can he give you? I could feel Sean's body stiffen slightly, and a surge of anger rose in my heart. Why? Alex insulted me, and now he wanted to slander my friend. I stared at him coldly and said word by word. Who I like has nothing to do with you. What right do you have to criticize me? Alex, you really disgust me. With that, I pulled Sean and turned to leave. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Alex standing there as if he had lost his way, while Linda seemed relieved. But none of that mattered to me anymore. Chapter 13. Sean drove me home, and I felt a bit guilty. I'm really sorry for dragging you into this mess. Sean didn't say anything, his long eyelashes covering his eyes. Do you also find the term outsider harsh? I quickly waved my hand, racking my brain to cheer him up. Not at all. They say heroes don't ask about their origins, Alex just has a nasty mouth. Don't take it to heart. Sean listened quietly, then suddenly threw himself into my arms with a sob. Even though Alex always says that, it still hurts. His eyes were bright as he looked at me. Anne, you would never say that about me, right? My heart ached, and I quickly reassured him, cursing Alex 1,000 times in my mind. After patting Sean's head and watching him walk away, I turned and went upstairs. After washing up, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Curious, I answered. There was no sound, just faint breathing. After a while, a voice finally spoke. Anne. It was Alex. I had blocked all his numbers, but he still managed to call me from a new one. Just as I was about to hang up, he spoke first. Don't hang up. I have something to ask you. Go ahead. Alex's voice sounded weak. Anne, you once said you would never leave me. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange sadness. You also said you would always protect me. After a moment of silence, he asked hoarsely. Do you really not like me anymore? I responded softly. Yes, I really don't like you anymore. As if he had expected this, he suddenly laughed. All right, then I'll chase you again. The call ended, leaving me bewildered. What was he up to now? Chapter 14. After that call, Alex didn't show up again. I thought he was just having a momentary impulse. Unexpectedly, a few days later, Linda suddenly invited me out. I accepted her invitation. It was the same calf, but this time Linda, despite her meticulously applied makeup, couldn't hide her exhaustion. She no longer had her usual haughty demeanor. As soon as she saw me, she started speaking with a choked voice. "Anne, what did you do to Alex? Why does he want to break up with me now?" Linda glared at me angrily, but I looked at her calmly. "You should ask Alex about that." She was furious, but when her gaze fell behind me, her eyes turned red. "Linda!" Alex, with a grim expression, strode towards us. "Alex, why are you here to see Anne? Are you trying to cause trouble?" I couldn't help but notice the red string on Alex's wrist, surprised that he had picked it up again. They seemed to have said something to each other, and then Linda left in tears. Alex turned to me, his eyes full of pleading. "I'm sorry, Anne, I didn't know she would come to you. I've broken up with her." I looked away, nodded lightly, and was about to leave. Behind me, Alex's voice, tinged with sadness, sounded unusually pleasant. "Anne, do you not care at all anymore?" I stopped, looked back at him silently, just as he had once looked at me in the hospital. Then, without saying another word, I turned and left. Chapter 15. From that day on, a ring and a bouquet of flowers would inexplicably appear at my door every day. I knew why Alex was sending me the ring. Because in the past, I had secretly hoped that one day Alex might marry me. I remembered leaning against him, full of hope, asking him, "Alex, will you marry me someday?" Even now, his expression at that moment was etched in my memory. He had sat up abruptly, a mocking smile on his face as he looked at me. "Marry you? Only if you disappear. Otherwise, no way. How about that?" Because of that remark, Alex was angry for several days. In the end, I had to cry and apologize, begging him not to ignore me, and only then did the matter pass. I pulled myself out of the memory and sighed softly. Those items ended up in the trash. I no longer cared about them. Later, someone sent me a video. It was in a familiar private room, with a cake smashed on the floor in front of Alex. He was kneeling on the ground, licking the cream off the carpet. The most famous young master in the city, at that moment, looked like a pitiful stray dog. At the end of the video, he stumbled towards the camera, his voice trembling. "Anne, I'm sorry, really sorry. I regret it so much." Every word was like a drop of blood from the heart. I turned off the video expressionlessly, feeling no emotion. Belated feelings are cheaper than weeds. Alex, we both know this truth. Chapter 16. These days, the rain poured down incessantly, and suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I was startled and leaned close to the door, asking softly, "Who is it?" A familiar voice reached my ears. "Anne." Was it John? I hurriedly opened the door. There stood John, drenched from head to toe, his back slightly hunched, looking like a flower battered by the wind and rain. As soon as he saw me, his lips moved, and he looked at me with helpless eyes. "Today is my mom's Memorial Day, and I was kicked out of the house." These words sent a shock through my heart, and I quickly invited him inside to escape the rain. John took a hot shower, and I brought him a steaming cup of ginger tea. He wrapped himself in my coat and sat obediently on the sofa. Before I could say anything, John began to recount what had happened. As he spoke, he looked at me with eyes full of grievance. "Anne, you're all I have left." I gently coaxed him to sleep, but my heart grew heavier with each passing moment. Poor John. Not only did he have to endure the exclusion from Alex and his group, but even his family didn't treat him well. The next morning, as I opened the door to take out the trash, I found a crowd of people standing outside. Among them were the familiar faces of those who had once mocked me. When they saw me, Alex's eyes lit up, and he led the group into the house. He looked at me cautiously, his eyes full of hesitation. "Anne, I'm here to apologize." As soon as he finished speaking, the people behind him trembled and knelt down, repeatedly bowing their heads. We're sorry, really sorry, Anne. We were wrong. Please forgive us. Their pleas for mercy echoed one after another. Alex stood in the middle of the crowd, forcing a smile that looked both innocent and pitiful. But wasn't it Alex who had led the bullying against me? I sighed deeply. Alex, it's too late for everything. You should understand that there's no turning back for us. Alex's smile remained, but his eyes were tinged with redness. I know, but I'm begging you, please give me another chance. I felt utterly exhausted. Alex, don't you understand? I don't love you anymore. What you're doing only makes me dislike you more. Chapter 17. John suddenly stepped out of the bathroom. Anne, about washing your face. He stopped short when he saw the crowd. Alex's face turned pale as he saw John. He swayed as if enduring immense pain. You two are living together? Alex's eyes were full of disbelief. How could you? Why? Anne, is your love so worthless? Trying to reason with him would be futile. I walked over and took John's hand, smiling slightly at Alex. Who said I'm a fool? Naturally, my love is cheap. Alex, didn't you say I was a fool? Have you forgotten? Alex seemed to recall something, and he fell silent. You heard everything. I looked at him coldly. Alex's face was filled with sorrow, and he glanced at me one last time. I'm sorry, Anne. He turned and left, looking like a lost soul. The room fell silent immediately. I let go of John's hand, and he suddenly asked me, Is there any chance for you and Alex to get back together? I was taken aback and shook my head at him. No chance. In fact, it should have ended the first time he brought another woman home. But I couldn't bear to let go and didn't have the heart to end it. John lowered his head abruptly, looking a bit uneasy. Then what about me? Before I could react, he continued speaking. I don't have any lingering feelings for anyone else, and there are no other women around me. If you're willing to be with me, I'll treat you very well. His sudden confession caught me off guard, filling my heart with doubt. John likes me? How could that be? Why? Chapter 18. I didn't accept John's confession. Having just ended an 8-year relationship, I wasn't in the mood to start a new one immediately. It wouldn't be fair to John. John looked a bit disappointed at the time, but he said he understood. He said, Then I'll wait in line. When you feel like dating again, save a spot for me, okay? I smiled and agreed. I found a job I liked, and life was peaceful and content. The next time I heard about Alex was through a call from Emily. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. Anne, I'm begging you, please go see Alex. I'm really begging you. Her crying left me confused. There were some noises on the other end of the line, followed by Alex's voice. He sounded tired. Anne, I'm fine. How have you been? Pretty good since I left you. He chuckled softly, his tone gentle. That's good. I won't bother you anymore. His words left me puzzled. I frowned and hung up the phone. Later, I finally understood what Alex meant. The large screen in Central Square was broadcasting the news. The anchor's voice was calm and steady. According to reports, Alex, the CEO of the Alex Group, was found deceased at home today. It has been confirmed as a self-inflicted death. Chapter 19. Alex's Side Story Part 1. The first time I met Anne was in a narrow alley. She was surrounded by a group of people, crying and shouting, her clothes torn and tattered. I didn't want to get involved. But maybe she looked too pitiful at that moment. I softened. Dealing with those thugs was easy. I glanced at Anne, who was disheveled, and casually threw my coat over her. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that Anne's eyes were shining, and she blushed as she asked for my name. I didn't want to get involved. But when I met her eyes, I somehow told her. I couldn't forget how happy she looked, saying she would repay me someday. Watching her walk away, I lit another cigarette. Since Emily left, I hadn't felt this way in a long time. It was quite interesting. For Anne, I transferred to her class. I saw her immediately, sitting alone in the most inconspicuous corner of the classroom. She didn't even dare to look up at me. I walked over to her, and Anne smiled foolishly at me. She said, "Alex, thank you." In the social circles of the capital, people either liked my face or wanted to climb my family's social ladder. But Anne was different. Her intentions were as pure as water, as loyal as a dog. I hadn't done anything remarkable, yet she treated me like a treasure. Silly girl. Hey, she really was a fool. When others said Anne had some mental issues, I didn't think much of it. What did it matter to me? I wasn't her guardian. But Anne got anxious, tears streaming down her face, begging me not to ignore her, saying she would treat me even better in the future. I found it amusing and comforted her, while also dealing with those who bullied her. She was always around, and it was annoying. After dealing with those troubles, Anne became even closer to me. She always looked at me with shining eyes. I didn't like her. But as a man, facing such a gaze, I couldn't help but feel a bit proud. Anne took me to meet her grandmother twice. The first time was in her shabby little house, filled with the smell of poverty, and I had to listen to her grandmother's nagging. I felt very irritated. The second time, I learned that her grandmother had passed away. Seeing her hand me a red string, I pretended to be emotional and said I would take good care of Anne. In the social circles of the capital, everyone was an actor. Anne stayed with me for 8 years. I grew more and more disgusted with her, a fool who followed me around, wanting to be the lady of the Alex family. How dare she? On her birthday, she stood amidst the chaos and asked if I regretted it. Of course, I didn't regret it. Who would regret losing a fool? Thinking back to that time, I wish I could go back and punch myself. Alex, you deserved it. You really deserved it. Chapter 20. Alex's Side Story Part 2. Emily returned from abroad, crying and saying she had no choice but to leave. I knew very well why she had to go abroad. But I did have genuine feelings for Emily, so I was happy to play along. Anne was still as foolish as ever. Even though I had a relationship with Emily, she could forgive me. Yes, because she loved me so deeply. Emily asked why I was with Anne. I told her Anne had some mental issues, and sometimes I regretted saving her. Emily laughed and bought a pair of couples bracelets, playfully asking me to throw away the old red string on my wrist. I hesitated for a moment but eventually threw it away. After all, in the end, Anne would always forgive me, right? I didn't expect Anne to leave so decisively. When I realized something was wrong, it was already a week after we had separated. I went to find her, but her cold eyes deeply hurt me. She said, "Alex, I don't like you anymore." I didn't believe it. We had been through 8 years together. How could she just let go? Anne might just need time to cool down, I could understand that. Until I saw her walking side by side with John, I started to panic. I lost control, speaking without thinking, like a madman questioning her. All I got was, "Alex, you really disgust me." My heart ached like never before. I had never felt this way. I realized then that I truly liked Anne. I tried to win her back, vaguely remembering that Anne once said she wanted to marry me. What nonsense about being well matched in social status, I just wanted to marry her now. The ring I sent remained untouched, and the bouquet was thrown into the trash. I knew Anne well, she never went back on her decisions. But I was unwilling to give up. I went to her house to beg for her forgiveness, only to be met with her disgusted eyes and John standing behind her. At that moment, I understood completely. Anne no longer needed me. I locked myself in the old villa, the loneliness unbearable. I wondered, had Anne been living like this for the past 8 years? So this was how it felt. I didn't know how much time had passed. As my consciousness began to fade, I heard Emily's cries and Anne's voice. I forced myself to stay awake and asked how she was doing. Anne said she was doing well without me. That's good. Now even the existence you despise will disappear. I smiled, feeling a sudden sense of relief. Anne, I'm sorry. I love you.